Black August.
Black Rockers United, Nicole Brew Media. I am here with Chelsea Coronin from Famined Records, metal label owner in LA. Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How have you been?
Doing all right. Thanks for asking. What's new in your world, Chelsea? What's going on?
Whew. I mean, it's been an interesting year. I think I can speak for everybody, really, to be honest on that. I've been lucky enough where I've been able to continue doing what I usually do, which I know some other people haven't been as lucky, really. I've heard of venue closings, I've been people being let go all over the world, and it's nice to be able to still rely on things I used to before. We did have to pump the brakes a little bit overall. There was a lot of, especially March and April when it really hit, there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of, will we be here, halfway through the year? Who knows? I mean, bigger companies put everything on hold or called it quits. So who's to say that a small indie is going to stick around? So we did slow down a little bit.
I get you.
But we re-strategized and had to rearrange the schedule a little bit. We try to keep as consistent as possible, so we've been focusing on less. We kept the quality, but definitely less on our hands to make sure we can still keep up with everything that's happening. We put out a couple of albums this year, which is really, we usually put out more by now, but again, figured we'd take it slow at this point. So we put out a couple of albums, a handful of singles, and then we have a new single tomorrow. I have another single next week. So we're still keeping busy. We're doing what we like, and we're just trying to, adapt. I have new music scheduled until the last available Friday of December or something along those lines. We're not taking any hiatuses or anything like that.
Wow, I'm so proud to hear that. You have new music coming out all the time, and it definitely reflects in your social media and your excitement what you do. When did you first get introduced into metal? If you could tell us about your youth and how you discovered the scene.
So I'm from Italy, fun fact. So I was born and raised there for 20 years, and I've been here for about 7 or 8, roughly. Fresh out of high school, and I came here to the States. And when I used to live back there, I grew up on a lot of late 90s, early 2000s R&B. That was like what my mom used to jam all the time.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of 50 Cent, P. Diddy, Eminem, really a lot of Nelly and Neo. And when I started developing my own taste, I still stuck with a lot of R&B. I love Neo, I still do. Craig David, but I also started going to more mainstream radio-y kind of stuff, like anything really. And then eventually I discovered the rock, I guess rock as a broader term. Good Charlotte were amazing. I used to love Good Charlotte. Simple Plan were great. So I had that angsty teen phase, obviously. So those were the only thing I'd listened to for periods at a time. I think the first CD I've ever asked to receive was a Simple Plan CD. Pretty sure. And then from there, the transition to Paramore was kind of, by default.
Yeah.
So Paramore opened a whole new world. I was like, oh shit, tattoos and piercings, this is great. So that's when I started listening to more alternative stuff. But one day, I don't know, where I'm watching this video, or I don't even remember what video it was. I just remember Situations by Escape the Fate was playing.
Ooh, cool.
And I was hooked. Okay, I love this bit. I'm going to look it up. I want to know what song this is. I looked up the song, watched the video, and I was like, shit, okay, cool. I like this, so I'll listen to the album. And the screaming, initially, I wasn't a fan. But again, coming from R&B to screaming, it's a pretty big leap. So I'd steer towards songs that had either only cleans or solid 70%, 80% cleans with the occasional screaming. And this is how it goes. You Google bands who sound like insert band name, and Google pulls up results and recommendations and threads on Reddit and all that. So I started kind of navigating the scene just to see who was out there. And I used to listen to anything really that I could get my hands onto that was labeled as post-hardcore. Dance Giving Dance, The Word Alive, Aston Alexandra, all the teen bands in the early 2000s, in the 2010-ish kind of era. And from there, I honed in on what I like and what I prefer versus what I don't. which is now much more, I guess the R&B kind of still comes into play as a background because I still steer towards predominantly cleans or more melodic progressive stuff. I've learned to try heavier things. I've learned to try more technical things. I'm a band that a few years ago was too heavy for me. Now I work with. So I've learned to, give a shot to a little bit of everything.
Cool.
And then on the side, I still listen to top 40 whenever I feel like it. I kind of jam a little bit of everything. Sometimes even a couple of country songs, just a couple though.
Just like two. Right. Okay. What kind of country artist?
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm well versed or anything, but I will say the occasional Carrie Underwood shows up in on rotation every now and then. And also, I think one or two songs by Rascal Flatts. I'd like to say, and it's literally one or two. That's the extent of it. I don't really deal with country. There's just those two or three songs that I'm like, wow, okay, these, regardless of genre, these are great.
I feel that, and I feel like even your country influences, they're kind of R&B-ish. Carrie Underwood has like a bluesy R&B feel, so I can see why you dig her, and I can see why a lot of the bands that you have on Famined Records reflect your taste from back then and also now. From Applesauce and Despite Exile to Windrunner, they're all very melodic and have that bluesy, grungy sound, but super metal. I love it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. How did you reach out to each of the bands for Famined and say that you would like to represent them? Because I definitely dig all of the sound that you have brought to this label.
There was a time when we were figuring stuff out where I would do a lot of outreach. We weren't really anybody. So I had to do a lot of legwork and just reach out and do my own research and hit up the bands that I thought we could help or that I thought could benefit from our help. And there's been a lot of trial and error in that, obviously. And not all the moves I made were right. I'm by any means knocked it out of the park right at the first try.
Oh, I get it.
But again, it's trial and error. I had to learn that the hard way too. Eventually, lately, it's a lot of connections. A good chunk of bands I run into now, it's more like because of people that we know in common. For example, Applesauce worked with an engineer. I'm going to say he makes the master of the album. And I'm so sorry if you see this and I'm wrong. And I had worked with him prior with another couple of bands. So word of mouth kind of circles like that. Because he might have name dropped me or they might have seen that I worked with him before. So that was like an easy connection. Despite Exile, I've known for a while, actually. I tried signing them years ago when we weren't where we are now. And they went with a bigger label for multiple right reasons. Yeah. And when they came freelance again and we started talking here and there, we eventually made them an offer and it looks like it worked out so far. But I've known them for years. I used to talk to the guitarist who's now not necessarily in the band anymore, but I've known them since 2015 or something. Oh, wow. Windrunner are one of the ones somebody that works for me reach out to. They work with my friend. He was their manager at the time. And he has a really good ear. He kind of fell off the face of the earth. I have not seen him on social media in a while, but he has a really good ear. He had brought other bands to me before, and they all went really well. They all did really good. So it's like, if he's got an eye on these guys, they might be worth my time. I don't know how much you know about them, but they're Vietnamese. So it's a different scene over there. I wouldn't even know where to begin. So I was like, you know what? They might be worth looking into. However, I don't think we're at a point where we can pick up somebody from that far where we can't really help much. So, let's look into them. But business-wise, I don't know what we can do. And my friend who reached out to them, our A&R at the time, was like, talk to the guitarist, got a couple of demos or singles back. And he came to me and was like, no, just check it out. Check it out. Don't worry about the rest. Just check it out. So I listened to a couple of the songs and was like, all right, cool. So that's how the guitarist and I started talking directly and ended up releasing an album together at the end of 2018. We did another one last year. We're gearing up for another one next year. And I mean, it's been a blast because it's such a different take from, more Western music and just Western mentality, really. So it's been interesting also get the chance to learn and see different things. So I've had a bit of a mix. How I find bands, how bands find us, there's a whole lot less outreach lately than there was before. Now it's a lot of word of mouth. We get submissions here and there, and again, it's a small the metal community is small overall.
Yeah.
So you're bound to run into somebody who knows your friend or somebody who knows a friend who you've met before. So it's a lot of that too. It's a lot of stumbling across people who have worked with so and so, who you're friends with, or who you'll be working with, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I love that you're definitely highlighting the synergy of metal, right? Like how the community is small, but we get so much done when we bridge those gaps together. I mean, even if they're in Vietnam, Windrunner works with you now, and in California and the USA.
I know, it's crazy. I know, it's 100% crazy.
Bands like Melbourne, etc. Let's go down the list. I mean, how does that feel to have that connection now? Whereas, you know, it's taken years, but you're finally to the point where bands come to you through word of mouth.
I know, it's crazy. Really, I never thought we'd get to that point, or if we did, I still didn't think it would take the amount of time it has taken. Because I still remember, you know, we had a couple of years ago still, like 2018, we had an email thread, which was bands we're looking into, and it was just a list of bands that I enjoyed and then other people enjoyed, and we'd just cross-reference them and be like, okay, this we'll agree on, this not necessarily, to, you know, get a different set of eyes or ears, I guess. You know, band name link and favorite songs, like a YouTube video, and different opinions circulating. What a thing I always make sure I don't fall into is working with somebody without hearing somebody else's opinion first, because I know I can be biased, especially if it's something that reminds me a whole lot of something else, and maybe I'm not hearing it right. Maybe I think, wow, these guys remind me of so-and-so. Pick it up, and somebody else is like, well, they do, but this could be better, the vocals could be better, the mix could be better. But I'm like, no, they remind me of one of my favorite bands, so I don't care, I'll work with them. So I always try to get a second opinion, because I don't really want to end up blindsided by just like my personal taste, because it's not just, it doesn't come down to only that at the end of the day. That's how we found a couple of bands that we work with back in 2018. There's only one band I reached out to this year that I could think of a week ago. That's about it. Everybody else is either current, has been with us for a minute, or we've been talking since last year. This has not been a year of big outreach. Just nice to see people come to us at some point. It means at the very least, we're putting our name out there.
100%, yeah. It means that you finally reached the point that you wanted to. Respect to that, Chelsea.
Yeah.
So how did this start? And does that email thread, was that at the beginning of when you made Famined Records, when you're kind of getting a feel for who you wanted to collaborate with?
I think it started out when I was really young. I had just turned 21, actually. So a lot of that was very naive of me. Well, I haven't lost that. I used to pick up bands where it was just like, you sound great, let's work together. That was pretty much the only criteria at the time, which, you know, for a business who just took out a loan is not necessarily the best move. Again, I learned that in time. So through the years, we kind of tweaked that approach where now it's like, I love your music, but let's make sure there's something we can do before we do something, or let's make sure it's an expense we can afford before we do something about. But back in the days, I don't really know how it started. I had a different company, and then a friend of mine got me in touch with the former owner of Famined Records. He was looking to sell. I was looking to grow, and I was like, all right, this sounds like a match made in heaven. Here's my college money tuition. Okay. I'll buy it out from you. And literally, I used my college money.
Wow.
So I know, another not necessarily great idea I had.
That is so cool.
But it worked out. And at the time, again, I had to, you know, he had a legacy. He had a company. He had developed it to a certain point. So I stuck mostly with his style of music. It didn't make sense for me to take over a company and then just do a complete overhaul without even knowing what I was doing.
That's true.
So we kind of stuck with the same niche, within the same genre. And one of the things I wanted to avoid while we were still building was like just go in and disrupt it from the ground up. And then in the past couple of years, we've branched out a whole lot more. And I think I'm not necessarily steering away, but definitely putting less focus on what he had started at the time and more of what my personal preferences are, which lie in the heavy and technical just as much as they lie in, you know, the alternative rock. Like I have a band currently that we dropped a single for this year that's just 100% modern radio rock.
Nice.
It's there's nothing heavy about it. There's nothing metal about it. They have a couple of moments, but there's really, if you were to label it, it would not be categorized as metal at all. I had to work my way to this kind of figuring out what exactly I want to work with that is not going to alienate the fans we currently have, but it's also not going to make me choose to work with things that I don't necessarily want to work with.
The balance is hard to strike, but you did it,
It's fun. I want it to be fun at the end of the day. I want to work with something that I know I enjoy. I once picked up a band that I thought would profit us, regardless of whether I liked it or not. I was like, you know what? I got to a point where I'm like, this is also a business. And as much as I like the music, it also has to make me money. Otherwise, this is not going to stick around, because if I keep spending, but I don't make it back, then it doesn't matter how good the music is. So I picked up a band that I thought would make us a good amount of money. Ironically enough, it didn't. And part of it, I'm sure it was on me because I was not into the music. So I wasn't able to push it as much as I would have with something I genuinely enjoy. And that was the only band I've ever picked up where I was not sure. I fell into the trap again a while after. And then before we released anything and we were too involved, I was like, you know what, never mind. I'm sorry. Like, because, we tried to make it work and we made all these plans and all this budgeting, but I'm not feeling it. And I feel like that if we go ahead, then it's too late to turn back. So I'd rather turn back now before releasing anything, even if it messes everything up, that have you stuck with us when you don't want to be and we don't want you to. So I had to be a little bit more critical when it comes to that, but also make sure I don't lose sight of the fact that I need to like the music. I have learned that doing it, for me personally, doing it just for the money did not work. Because if I don't enjoy the music, I don't have the spirit. I don't have the incentive to work with it.
How are you going to promote it, Chelsea, if you're not even really feeling it? And if you want to, like you said, you already get like halfway through the plan, but then you're just like, I just don't like this music doesn't.
I know. I was like, I'm not feeling it. And I feel like I'm going to regret spending money in this, and then I don't want to resent you, and then you're going to resent me, and this is going to be a mess. I'd rather you be mad that we're not going to pull through now than you be mad that we pulled through and we didn't pull our own weight.
I respect you so much, because what it really is you didn't want to have to like be a people pleaser in the industry. You're just have my opinions, it might cause some waves, but I like what I like. And I think that's important, especially in metal, because a lot of metal is peer pressure and people saying like, you should like this band and you should go ahead with this thing. But it's like, I'm not really, that's just my opinion.
It is. No, it really is. I know. And I don't know. It's just, if I have to spend time and money and put effort into something and turn down other things, like especially before when we didn't have a lot of funding, so all my savings would go to the turn down vacation time. I would rather not go on vacation, because then all the vacation money I wouldn't get paid for would come into my account, and then I just put it into the company. Like, there's no incentive in doing that if I don't want to promote or spend time and money on something. So I want to at least make sure that what I do is something I like. To be like, okay, you know what? If I have to skip on a night out with friends, that's fine, because I'm gonna be spending it working with this music that I actually enjoy listening to.
Yeah, doing something that you love, because, like you said, you have to take that time off and make those sacrifices sometimes to push labels, to push your vision. And sometimes it is like the vacation and having to like pull back a little bit because you get over ambitious about being everywhere and doing everything all at once. Rocking. How would you describe Famined Records to someone who's never heard heavy music before? Like in one sentence.
Diverse, if you want to use one word specifically. I wouldn't know how to build a sentence per se. For me, it's been about variety. Like I said, I wanted to stay true to the original sound, which for the most part we have. It's still a sound that we deal with. Like, it's a smaller niche of metal that we still promote, we still work with. We still have a majority of our bands fit into that category. However, we started branching out here and there. So I really do think diversity is probably the best way to put it, not just musically. It's definitely there musically, but also like culturally and country-wise, we're all over the place. And again, myself, I've lived in the States for less than a decade. I'm from a European country. I was born and raised in a European country. So I still have my European mentality. I still gone about life here. And my friends sometimes are like, "Why are you looking at me like that?" And I'm like, "I don't know what slang you just used." So it's still a very different perspective for me being here. And maybe I bring a different perspective to the table as well when it comes to business.
I think so.
I like to believe anyway. So it's different, it's diverse, and I like it that way. I don't want to become, and this is something that a friend of mine warned me about back in the days. I don't want to become the label that puts out the same thing just under a different band name, basically.
True.
I still work with him. I still talk to him. And he was one of the first people who was like, I understand that you have like, a legacy that you want to continue, but just don't fall into the trap. In the long run, don't fall into that where you'll end up, all we put out is this specific genre. And if that's what you want to do, by all means, but if that's not what you want and that's what you fall into, then it's going to be a problem digging your way out of that. Which is true, 100%. He was 100% right. So
good friend.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I still talk to him. I still work with him here and there. He's helping us with his name is Hector. He's helping us with vinyl for a couple of bands and such. We're finally branching out into vinyl. That's going to be fun. And he's been helping us set it all up and get us some quotes. So we were just talking about it a couple of nights ago. And he was one of the people who was just like, eventually, if you don't want to be a one-trick pony, you have to branch out. If you want to be, then you're on the right track. Like, by all means, keep doing that. But if that's not the goal and it's just happening by mistake, be mindful of that. I'm glad that, it took us a while to bring the diversity in. But we eventually found a way to incorporate it where it doesn't feel weird, it doesn't feel forced. Because if you have a metal label that keeps putting out metal and then one day they have pop rock, it's a bit stagnant. So yeah. I'm glad we were able to do it without having people be like, "What the hell is this?" It was a nice transition, I think, where now people hear that kind of music and they don't necessarily expect it. They're also not like, "What the hell is this?"
Right on. The wild part is I heard of Famined Records. I didn't know you were the person behind it 3 years ago. And I couldn't really describe the sound because there were so many sounds on Famined that I was like, that's a good thing. I shouldn't be able to typecast the label. Though I should be know what to expect from you. I shouldn't just expect one thing, So that's really awesome. So breaking barriers as a black badass, as a metalhead, those two things go hand in hand. When you first joined the scene, was there acceptance, resistance, or both?
I don't know. I don't think I ever quite stopped to think about that. I used to be a loner back when I was back at home, and out here it hasn't really changed much from that perspective. Ironically enough, all the people I hang out with, none of them actually listens to metal, which is kind of funny. My entire circle of friends, it's all mainstream rather than this or that, but nobody actually listens to metal. But my best friend, she actually every now and then goes for some Viking metal every now and then, but she's like the only one that will listen to. Like I mentioned to her once, A Day to Remember, thinking she won't know who they are. She's like, "Oh, of course, I know who they are. Everybody." I'm like, "Not everybody." So other than her. My entire circle of friends doesn't actually listen to metal. The ones I hang out with when there's no virus and such. Online, I do have a bigger network. There's people I talk to pretty much almost on a daily basis. They are all indeed, to a certain degree, in the metal community. The people I've been lucky enough to, talk to and make connections with and work with have all been incredibly helpful or available or supportive in different various shapes and forms. So I've been lucky enough where I have not really had any issues. I've not been singled out or anything along those lines. Maybe just because I've been able to find the right people, but I to my knowledge, I have never had a problem where I was looked down upon because I'm foreign or because I'm a person of color or because I'm a woman. To me personally, it's never happened. I've heard of friends that had that happen before, obviously. because it's a thing, it's there. But for me, it never has. I don't think any of the people I talk to, be it for business, be it because they're friends, or be it because they became friends through business, I cannot think of one person I would single out by saying, no, they made my life a little harder, or they were a little bit more skeptical. I don't think any of them actually ever approached it that way.
Good. Good. I mean, like, that's what I want to hear, you know, like it's nice to finally hear someone did not have that experience, that when they entered the industry, that it was something that they navigated to their knowledge and for the most part with no barriers in the way. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
at least
I
to
know.
me, Chelsea.
No, I feel yeah. Yeah, I think I've just been lucky enough where I have tried surrounding myself with the right people, and I've tried doing business with the right people too, where I make sure that I don't end up, if I hear something about somebody before I just decide to write them off, I look into it, and then if it turns out that it's true, I don't put business before our presence and our brand. So I don't sacrifice that, because I think that collaboration will make me money. And maybe that helps too, where I don't end up in difficult situations where I'm, maybe I'm known to associate myself with the wrong people. Therefore, the next business partner could be like, I'd rather not work with you, or I don't think you can do what you say you can do. I try to pay attention to that. And so far, everybody that I've worked with, and to a certain extent, some more, some less, but everybody's been receptive or helpful, or at the very least has been able to listen without judgment.
How about industry and life insights, I guess, like America versus your homeland in Italy, and, just being an underground curator for a decade? Why don't you share about that, please?
I don't think I was into music as much as have been since I moved here. Like I said, I liked it. I'd go to school listening to Good Charlotte, or whatever. I remember when I first got my first MP3, it was like everything. So I'd upgrade my iPod like almost every other year, because music was like, it meant a lot. But I don't think I was ever as involved. It was very much like on the fringes of, I love music, but that's the extent of it. Like, I'm not involved in it. Not an artistic person, so I'm not interested in that. It was just very much like a consumption kind of thing. Like, I want to listen to music 24/7. That's it. That's where I draw the line. So I was not involved in the music scene back at home at all, because like I said, I listened to it, and that was the extent of it. Here was a little different. When I came here, I was fresh out of college. I had a, a tourist visa.
Okay.
So when that expired, I started my paperwork for a green card, because I have relatives here in the States. So they helped out with that. I was kind of like in limbo for about a year and a half, where I couldn't really go to school, couldn't own a car, couldn't open a bank account, couldn't really do anything, because I was, I wasn't on a visa anymore because it expired. I was in between paperwork to start green card and residency.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of time on my hands and nowhere to go. I lived in a residential area, so without a car, I couldn't go anywhere. And, again, I didn't have money of my own, so I really couldn't do anything. Yeah. So online kind of became my way of dealing with every day, like meet people. So that's kind of how I fell into music, really. And like I said, I liked that for years before coming here, never to the extent where I wanted to do something about it.
Yeah.
And then, when you have every day available for a year and a half with no job, no homework,
right.
There's a lot you can do in, 600 almost days, because it was almost 2 years, like definitely the 400 to 500 days, basically. Kind of fell into it, and that's how I started meeting people and making some connections. And again, it's a small world, the metal scene, so it's easy to have a friend who introduces you to a friend who introduces you to a friend, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how it started. I wouldn't be able to compare the scenes as much from back home and here, simply because I was never a part of the scene there. I am good friends with some people in Italy. Despite I was from Italy, for example. So I'm good friends with people back at home who kind of keep me up to date with the state of the country, music-wise, and non-music-wise sometimes. I know it's a different scene, and most people I talk to back at home don't necessarily or aren't necessarily ecstatic about it. Because it's very much the same people, the same bands. If you want to make it big, you definitely got to get out of there. It's not really a country that's conductive to metal or the alternative scene per se.
I can see that.
So I kind of hear the same. I mean, we're an old country. We really are. We've been around since before Christ. So we're anchored, deeply rooted in our traditions. I mean, it's where the Pope lives. So that alone should really speak volumes. So, we're not necessarily the most progressive people. So there's less young people than there are old people. So really, we're an old country, quite literally.
Yeah.
So it's the same people that circle the scene. And, once you've met them all or you play where you could play, because, not every venue will give you the availability for this kind of genre, you kind of exhaust your options. So everybody tries to branch out and, tour Europe or, move somewhere else. I've heard of bands that moved. There's an Italian band that now lives in Paris. There's another Italian band I'm familiar with that now is in the UK. And these are just two that came to mind. So it's not necessarily dying, but it's also not expanding. The scene is kind of there. It's kind of like static, and it is, from what I heard, it is what it is.
New Italian bands, people are thrilled about it. Like when Frozen Crown came out, people were like, like there's actually more Italian metal.
and there's some good. That's the thing. There's some good bands that come out of there, be it because they've been around longer, be it because they used to be out and now they're not. One that comes to mind is Hopes Die Last, and I used to listen to them years ago, and I think they disbanded like forever ago or whatever, but they were great. I like them a lot. There was like some really good like screamo, post-hardcore, color, whatever you want, 2005, 2006 kind of vibes. I think there's some bands, I might be wrong, but there's a band currently called Within Destruction that either is Italian or has some Italian members, because they're like split in between two countries. And I know for a fact some members are Italian, because I know a couple of them, but by name only. But again, Italy is a small country, so we kind of keep running into the same, same circles and same people, even more. So there's good music that come out of there. There's just, all I notice is that if you don't break onto the international market, you don't really make it far. And I assume that kind of applies to a lot of other countries. But I can picture, a band making it big out here, not necessarily having to make it big in Europe. However, if you're from a smaller European country, you have to make it big out of there. Or you could be like a celebrity in your own country, but then the UK or Canada, the States, Australia might not even know who you are, per se. It really depends on where you are.
That's so real. And I guess the exposure comes a lot of the time from those fests, right? From festivals in Europe in which everyone gets together and, just hangs out and plays. But that's kind of changed through COVID, because now we have to do that virtually. Have you had to find like alternatives to like have bands perform? Have you explored virtual options as Famined Records? Keep rocking.
Here and there were one of the things that I've never fully offered as a company. Was booking, because I've never been able to pick it up myself. I mean, I tried my hands at it, failed miserably, but never again. So I know where our strengths are and what our weaknesses are, and so I never ever promise booking or touring to our bands. That is something that they have to handle for the time being. Until we're big enough where we can make certain promises, I steer away from that. So in a way, that kind of saved us, because that's why we weren't hit as bad. Because if every single band I have we're supposed to be touring now, we'd probably just be done for.
Yeah,
so
that's a devastating loss.
So I think that's one of the things that saved us, is the fact that we're not involved in the booking aspect of things, which who would have known turned out in our favor, really. And we have been. I was talking to one of our bands just the other night. They're from Michigan, and a friend in Michigan is looking to set up some lives throughout a local venue over there where they could just film it and then do it, stream it live, sorry.
That's cool.
And so we're just trying to get them in touch. And I'm sure they already know each other, because again, scenes are smaller when you zoom into a state. So I'm sure they know each other, but I brought it up to them, so we were just talking about it. We've had a couple of opportunities. Not a lot of our artists are into touring, but that's mainly because we work with smaller acts who don't necessarily tour as much, which again, that was probably another thing that got us kind of worked in our favor. So it's something that we're still looking into. It's not for us specifically. It has not been a priority, but if I ever run into like the opportunity, like this Michigan-based one. I just saw it and I reached out to my band and said, "Hey, there's an opportunity here. Like, let's look into this one." I had another one a while back for a live stream, so just um, forwarded that to the right bands as well. So when the opportunities happen or arise and I run into them, I make sure to bring it up. So it's more of I'll take advantage of it if I see the opportunity, but it's not something that right now we're seeking out. We're focusing on sticking to, developing your brand online, promoting it, advertising it, and marketing it properly, and kind of building a fan base online so that the next time when touring is back, you have a fan base across the states and you can actually tour them and expect some sort of turnout.
There you go.
Ideally. There you go.
I love it, Chelsea. I also love this collaboration between us, Brew founder Nate and I, like the crew, we're just so proud to make this possible.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys like ran into us. So thanks for sending that initial email.
Absolutely. I actually found you through the blog Symphonic Distribution. They were talking about Black-owned labels, and I was like, only one on here is metal, and it's you. I got to reach out to this person.
I'm sure there's not a lot. I'm sure like they're not as widespread as they should or could be. So glad to be on there for a reason.
Yeah, 100%. What other like accomplishments are you proud of in 2020? I know we took a hard hit, but like, is there anything you want to share with us before we close out? Be happy to hear it.
I think maybe this is premature, so who knows? Maybe I'm putting it out too early. But I never had the chance to work with an Australian band. It's not quite been like a goal per se, but always been like I've had the chance to work with Europe. I've had the chance to work with Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Vietnam, China, of all places, Hong Kong. So I always thought, I've branched out pretty much from one side of the globe to the other. And Australia's always kind of eluded me in a way.
Yeah.
Again, not that I was actively seeking it out, but I also always thought it was kind of curious that we landed some other countries that I never thought I'd land, like Vietnam. That's like one of my prime examples. Not in a million years I would have said, yeah, one of, my proudest moment was when I signed a Vietnamese band. So it goes to show, So I always thought it was interesting that of all the places I had the chance to work with, Australia has never quite been on the map. And now we're actually finally, after, half a decade or whatever, we're bringing somebody on board. And it's a friend of mine. I don't know. I call him a friend. Maybe he hates me. Who knows? But I've known of their band for a while, and I just never really gave it much thought. But he's in two bands, so I just knew one of them. Ironically enough, I did not know he was in a second one, which is the one that eventually caught my eye. And we've been in touch for other things in the past for like about a year now, just for totally unrelated stuff. And eventually I put it out there. I was like, listen, if you're looking to take the next step with your main band, and you ever want to talk about it, let's talk about it. So I kind of put it out there. We never really talked about it again. Nothing came out of it. Now, recently, the past couple months or so, since quarantine hit, I kind of circled back and we started talking about it a little bit more seriously, trying to engage, what they are looking for, what they need help with.
Yeah.
And, their needs and our needs align pretty much. So we talked and, again, maybe having known each other for a while prior to striking this conversation also helped. So now we're actually kind of going on full speed ahead, and we're putting out a single in about a month and a half. Something like that, yeah. I think it's halfway through November. So, and they're the first, if I remember correctly, they're the first Australian band I've had the chance to work with. So I'm glad to get the chance to break into that kind of market as well, because it's a brand new market. I get bands from Indonesia or Japan. Hey, we know you guys. Like, we know some of your bands, because it's kind of like that kind of Southeast Asia circle.
Yes, it is.
So I can understand how Japanese bands or Malaysian bands come to us saying, hey, we heard of you and your bands. It makes sense. Never had the chance to break into Australia as a scene. So it's going to be interesting to see how the reception is over there. There's definitely a whole lot that I don't know about that area of the globe. So I'm curious to see. It's just gonna be interesting to see how it goes because it's all new. Just like Southeast Asia was 2 years ago. Now it's Australia. So it's gonna be fun.
I'm so thrilled, like the future is bright and we're definitely like making big moves and, the momentum for metal just keeps on going, doesn't it, Chelsea?
Hopefully it keeps going.
It's been a real pleasure to have you here, Chelsea. You're definitely a rockin' guest, and I'm so happy that 12 Brew Talk got to be with the owner of Famined Records.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. To Nicole Colley from Black Rockers United, to Chelsea. We're both kicking ass. And take care,
Thank
okay?
you. You too. Thank you.